They go, man, you love the adrenaline. I'm like, I hate adrenaline. I'm allergic to adrenaline, I think, because if I get adrenaline, it means I've lost control of the outcome. Yeah, I've got my body's now firing off adrenaline going, you're right on the edge and you don't know what's going to happen. And I hate that feeling. I absolutely hate it. I'm a control freak.
G'day and welcome back to Real Risk, the adventure podcast. Now, for those who enjoy video podcasts, I've engaged with Podbooth here in Adelaide to produce the show, and I'm really excited about how it's going to work. For those who listen in the car or on your daily walk, the audio files, of course, will still be available. My name's Richard Harris, and you might remember me from my involvement in the 2018 Thai Cave Rescue. Well, that adventure has led to many other exciting opportunities, including the chance to chat with like-minded adventurers and risk takers on this podcast. There's lots of exciting things to announce over the course of the season, and plenty of brilliant, daring, adventurous and thoughtful guests already lined up. There'll be more extreme athletes, more divers, more soldiers, more people who get off on going fast, climbing high or challenging themselves in ways most of us can't even dream of. And all of them will talk to us about why they think the benefits outweigh the dangers, why risk is integral to making us stronger, more resilient and better able to cope with the stresses of daily life. And let's face it, when has that ever been more important? G'day and welcome back to Real Risk, the adventure podcast. Another episode, another extraordinary guest, as today we enter the world of aviation. And I'm not just talking about puttering around in your Cessna or jumping on a commercial flight. The guy I'm chatting to today can pretty much fly anything, from an Air Force jet to a composite MXS raceplane in the Red Bull air races. Australian Matt Hall is a third-generation pilot from New South Wales who, during a high-octane career spanning over 35 years, knows a thing or two about risk management and pushes the envelope just about as far as is humanly possible. And here he is right now on Real Risk. You would not believe how many requests I have had to interview you over the last couple of years. You're obviously quite well known in the aviation industry and by fellow enthusiasts around the country and overseas. Your name has popped up at least half a dozen times in the emails that I regularly get from people asking me, you've got to talk to this bloke. So maybe it's the one benefit of COVID that I've managed to catch you with a bit of downtime.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the silver lining of COVID at the moment, isn't it? There's people that are normally traveling around the world doing stuff are a lot more accessible in time at the moment.
Now, I managed to grab myself a copy of your book, which I'm happy to give a quick plug. I admit I'm only just over a third of the way through it because I'm not a speed reader and it only arrived on Friday. I was a bit slow off the mark with that one, but there is a lot to talk about. You've achieved more than a few things in your life. So I always find the best place to start is at the beginning and just to find out why and how you ended up in a life of aviation.
Lead away and I'll do my best to entertain.
Well, you're a third-generation pilot, and I was really fascinated to read that your grandfather was a World War II pilot. Tell me about your grandfather.
He was a pilot in World War II. Did his training at Temora, actually, on Tiger Moths. And then there's a link later on for me with Temora. But he flew in the Southwest Pacific Ansons and Oxfords, which are twin-engine light transport aircraft. He was just doing his conversion onto Beauforts, actually, when the war finished, which is actually probably a good thing because once you start getting into Beauforts, you're now talking bombers, and then the transition was from Beauforts then onto Beaufighters. The survival rates were a lot less in those two aircraft, so it's probably a good thing for me that he was able to finish up the war. Not in the high risk area, but he didn't end up continuing flying for a career because there wasn't a lot of flying jobs around for ex Air Force pilots back in World War II. So he let his flying lapse at that point and continued a career basically in the university scene. And that was pretty much the end of his flying side of things until my dad started flying as well. And then that's how my granddad got his flying kicks, was flying with either my dad or me. Towards the back end of his life, he did some flying with me as well.
So have you got fond memories of him, the grandfather?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he never really talked about conflict. He's the classic male from those ages that doesn't talk about conflicts. Talked about flying. He was very obviously proud of my flying and my Air Force career. I had some very special flying experiences with him where I took him flying in some unique aircraft. I took him flying. He was probably about at least 75 years old when I took him flying in a pit special in two-seat pits. Which he was just blown away by the performance, obviously, of an unlimited aerobatic aircraft. He couldn't believe what the planes could do. But yeah, special things like that were very cool with my granddad.
The pit's a bit different to his Tiger Moth.
Yeah, he'd flown biplanes before, but yeah, the pits was just that little bit different.
Yeah. I have had a friend of mine's got a Tiger Moth, and I've had a bit of a steer of that. And just does feel like you could jump out and run faster.
When you fly pits, your heart's always in your mouth as well.
I think you're right from what I've heard about Beauforts and Beaufighters. They sound like they were vastly overpowered and underweighted, and even, if you put the throttles down too hard on the runway for takeoff, you could just about flip them over, couldn't you?
Yeah, in fact, from memory, I believe he did actually have a ground handling accident on takeoff in the Beaufort because they were that sort of plane. They were just super lightweight because of their construction, but putting massive power plants in them, and they were very, very fast aircraft for their time. And it was as I say, lucky to come out of the war as an Air Force pilot without any injuries, actually. So.
Your introduction to aviation came through your father and gliding.
That's correct, yeah. So, my dad, he had a love of aviation, most likely from seeing photos of my granddad, his dad, looking through his logbook, all that sort of stuff that kids do, and, the fascination of flight and the romance of it and all that sort of stuff. And my dad ended up getting a scholarship actually with Air Force cadets and did his training at Bankstown flying chipmunks. And at the end of school, the Air Cadets of the Air Force, in fact, had paid for his flying and for him to get his license. And then there was the obvious question. I go, son, you finished the school, we've paid for your license. Are you going to join the Air Force? And he was kind of talked out of it by his parents because they'd been in war, been through World War II, and they were sort of encouraged they encouraged him to think seriously about joining the Air Force, especially with Vietnam on and everything. That it's not a flying club; it's a commitment, and it's a high risk commitment. And so he didn't continue through that process of being in the Air Force, but continued to fly. And then took up gliding, actually, up at the Upper Hunter at Warkworth. He ended up being an electrical engineer and was working at the power stations up at Liddell, is what it was called, up in near Muswellbrook, and started gliding because it was a cheap form of flying, towing gliders with an Oster and also gliding as well. And that's where my love came from. That I would hang around with my dad on the weekends, and he'd take me to the gliding field and chuck me in the right-hand seat of the Oster while he towed gliders up and down all day. And then when he got his glider's license, he'd chuck me in the back of a Blanick and just go thermaling away and disappear for a few hours. And I'd just be sitting in the back watching the flying happening. And it's and that's when I decided. Yeah, in fact, I don't actually remember deciding I was going to be a pilot. It was just a given. I just knew I was going to be a pilot.
Well, it sounds like from reading your book that your first experiences in planes, you sort of knew you wanted to do it, but it didn't feel that great to you. Like you suffered from the usual nausea and fear that many of us suffer in small planes.
I did. In the gliders, I used to get a bit airsick just from the thermaling, and I was sitting quite low in the glider. I was pretty small, and I couldn't. They got a canopy that's over the top, but I couldn't see outside. I was below the level, so would be thermaling, bumping, turning. I'd actually get airsick, which was very frustrating to me because I wanted to be a pilot. And how can a pilot be airsick? And then same, my first aerobatic experience was in a Citabria with my dad. And we went and he was doing his aerobatic rating, and he went and got, once he was checked out that he could do a spin and a loop, we went up and did a spin and a loop. And I remember I was just so scared. It's like, here it comes. And I remember closing my eyes as it all happened, just going, I feel awful. How can this happen? And I was so disappointed in myself to be scared and feeling sick when that was actually what I wanted to do. And it kind of messes with your head because you sort of wonder, why do I want to do it if it makes me sick? And I think, there's a bit of image in there, and there's a bit of knowing what you really want and having to fight through your own fears. And I guess it's part of the challenge. It's part of actually making something worthwhile. If it was easy, everyone would do it and it wouldn't be so special. So this is like, well, you know what? It's going to be harder than I thought it would. I'm going to have to work through all these things, but it's still what I want, and it's going to make it that much more worthwhile when I get there.
I know exactly what you're talking about because I've spent my lifetime on boats and under the water with my diving, and I get terrible seasickness, and I hate being. I love boats, I hate being on boats. And so that's just something I've had to battle. And one of the reasons I've ended up in cave diving in freshwater, because there's no waves in caves. So much nicer environment for me. That's a big factor in why I sort of went down that route, I think. But I know that feeling of knowing that this is something you want to be doing, but having this side of it that you just really intensely dislike, and it does take a bit of a battle to get through it. So it just shows, I think, with sufficient determination, it's amazing what you can achieve if you're driven to that goal.
Yeah, for sure. I remember going to an air show in the 80s, and I was watching an unlimited aerobatic aircraft do its stuff. And I remember thinking, flying's what I want to do, and flying's cool, but that stuff, I've got no interest in it. And the guy that's doing that's absolutely crazy. And I don't know how anyone could actually say they enjoy that. And then now that's part of what I do for a job, and I actually enjoy it.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because, I get that a lot. You must be crazy to do what you do. And a lot of the guests on this show have been called crazy by people around them. And yet I'm sure you are like me. You don't feel like you're crazy at all. In fact, you don't feel like I speak for myself. I don't feel like I'm a risk taker. I don't feel courageous. I don't feel like I'm an adrenaline junkie in any way, shape or form. I love the challenge of executing what I do with safety. Is that the way you feel about it?
That's exactly how I am. Like I say to people, they go, man, you love the adrenaline. Like, I hate adrenaline. I'm allergic to adrenaline, I think, because if I get adrenaline, it means I've lost control of the outcome. I've got my body's now firing off adrenaline going, you're right on the edge and you don't know what's going to happen. And I hate that feeling. I absolutely hate it. I'm a control freak. And so when I'm doing stuff that people think is high risk or is giving me my adrenaline fix, what I'm doing is I'm doing something that requires absolute focus and concentration and so much preparation and planning that people don't have any understanding of what I've put into a 60-second event. And it's the execution of that 60-second event in a flow mentality where everything disappears from my thought process, apart from right where I am right now and the perfect line that I'm on, but being very aware of what's an immediate threat, but not being distracted by what's not an immediate threat. Feeling of satisfaction coming out the back end of an execution like that is beyond words. You can't describe how good it feels. And that is euphoria, not adrenaline. And that's what I enjoy.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask you to talk a little bit later about an incident that you had over Iraq. I was thinking about that sort of few seconds where you had some very quick and important decisions to make. And in cave diving, we have a saying that panic is death. And, that moment where you become unable to make rational decisions is when all is lost. And I think that your sport and your career in the Air Force are a perfect example of that philosophy, that you have to maintain control for as long as possible, because once control is lost, then, all is lost. Does that resonate with you?
For sure. There's always jokes about, a good pilot. A monkey makes a good pilot because monkey see, monkey do. But there's actually some logic to that, because, the whole 10,000 hour to be an expert, all that sort of stuff, it's true. You need to be well rehearsed. You need to be instinctive. And there's not many things in the world that are actually instinctive. Their breathing, is instinctive. But flying planes becomes instinctive with rehearsal. Cave diving what you do in that becomes instinctive with rehearsal and repetition. And it's the monkey see, monkey do is correct, because you end up being able to do things without thinking. And that means you've got more attention for when things go wrong. You can continue doing a complex task because you are monkey see, monkey do, and you've been doing it for 10,000 hours. So you can then now put some focus and energy into something that's not going right, as opposed to having all of your attention focused on execution. And when something goes wrong, it's overflow of your bucket of capacity overflows. And then that's the shutdown. And that's when things go wrong. So that's why people that are very, very good at something, expert level, that can do it instinctively, have much more capacity for when things go wrong, because they've got the ability to continue to do something while assessing a problem.
I think that term muscle memory is really important in that too, isn't it? Because, you've got complex tasks going on and you need to put your hand on that button or that lever without thinking about where it is and, how far to push it or pull it. And in that moment of crisis, you can't be learning new practical skills in that 3-second window that something crazy is going on, particularly in your world of, Mach 2 or whatever you're zooming around in the Air Force. And I'm actually, I don't know if you heard from our mutual friend who helped tee up this podcast. I'm undertaking my first flying lessons at the moment in a CT4, which is a plane that you're very familiar with, our friend Stephen Gale. It's great to be back at the bottom of that learning curve again and just feeling like you're all thumbs and you don't know where to look and you don't know what to think and you've got 10 things going on when you can only cope with one or two. It's a great experience that I think it's good to go back to learning complex tasks again like that. And I'm really enjoying it. Only 5 hours in, but a long way from mastery, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think if once you think you've learned everything, we've got nothing more to learn. You're on the way to checkout. So I'm always trying to push myself in different fields. A lot in aviation, but I'm always trying to look for a different rating in aviation that I don't have to challenge myself to continue to learn. I went and got my commercial helicopter license because I needed to continue to challenge myself. We own a King Air, so I got checked out on the King Air just so that I challenged myself to continue to be pushing the perfect flight in a King Air. So there's always new challenges out there. If you're not pushing yourself to learn, it's you might as well not get out of bed in the morning.
I did wonder if there was any endorsement that you really do still require, Matt, but there's always something, I suppose.
There's always something. I'm disappointed they retired the space shuttle because I fly gliders. That would have been a pretty cool glider to fly.
It's a fast one. It's a fast one, isn't it? On the home straight.
Oh yeah, supersonic glider. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the Air Force since I mentioned the CT4, which was one of the first planes I guess you jumped into. So you left school with the goal of becoming not just an Air Force pilot, but a fighter pilot, which is at the age of 17 or whatever, that's almost a grandiose goal, isn't it? Almost delusional to think that you could achieve that. And I was talking to a guest, one of the TT motorcycle riders who decided he was going to be a professional motorcycle racer when he left school. And we had this conversation about when the odds of achieving your goal are so remote, as I think statistically it would be for, a successful actor or ballerina, fighter pilot. You got to be the 1% of the 1% to actually achieve that goal. If that's my child, do I advise my kid that, that's a very sensible goal, you should definitely pursue that? Or do you just say, why don't you go and fly for Qantas? Not that that's a bad thing, but, probably more achievable. What was your parents' take on that idea?
I got pretty similar advice that my dad got from his parents. Is like, the Air Force not a flying club, and the chances of you being able to fly fighters are pretty slim. Got the same advice from my careers advisor at school. He'd call it advice from my mates at school. It was like, because this is in the age of Top Gun, had just come out as a movie, and I'm like, boom, that's me. And you can imagine now, 17-year-old turning up to school. I've just bought my Ray-Bans. I've got them on, turn up in the schoolyard going, hey, you seen the movie? I'm going to do that. And it's like, yeah, as if you're not doing that, mate. So that was the gist I was getting. And I pretty much accepted that advice. I actually decided, well, I guess I can't be a fighter pilot. That's probably too remote, too far out there for me to consider a possibility. And so I started thinking I'll be an airline pilot. I'll go and get my commercial license and train to be a Qantas pilot sort of thing. But I couldn't afford it. And I was running, got a part-time job. It just wasn't going to make it. I was fortunate to meet a Spitfire pilot actually, and he from World War II, and we got chatting, and I was amazed. Here's this guy who flew Spitfires, successful businessman afterwards, and he's looking at me going, man, I'd give anything to be in your shoes right now, so I could at least have a crack at joining the Air Force and seeing if I could fly these supersonic jet fighters. He goes, I can't think of anything that'd be more spectacular in the world than jumping in one of these jet fighters and taking for a fly. It took me about 6 hours to process what he was saying, in words that are my words now, but they were my unformed thoughts back then. Was that to have a great result, you need potential, and you need opportunity, and you need tenacity. And I had the potential that he wanted. I also had the opportunity he wanted. All I needed was the tenacity, and I went, you know what, I can generate that. And to get myself over the line, I remember having this thought with myself: is what am I scared of? And what I was scared of was failure, and people pointing their finger at me and going, told you couldn't do it. So I flipped it in my head and went, you know what? Something to be more scared of is spending the rest of your life wondering if you could have done it. I went, you know what? I'd rather find out that I couldn't and know it than spend the rest of my life wondering. So I'm doing it. And I joined the Air Force and it went from there.
Well, it's cool to honour that Spitfire pilot's dream in a way too, isn't it? To have a crack and succeed.
Exactly. And there was part of that in me going, there was a little bit of spite in me, like, I'll show you. But there was also like, I'm doing it for you. Like, I'll show you the people that told me I couldn't. And I'm doing it for you, the one person that said he'd love to be in my shoes.
What is it about the Spitfire that captures all boys and probably girls at a young age? Because for me, that aircraft remains the most romantic thing that ever took off the ground. And I met Douglas Bader, the legless World War II pilot, the guy who finally flew with his 10 legs. When I was a kid, he was over for the Crippled Children's Association. I remember meeting him and I've still got his autograph, and it had a profound effect on me as about a 10-year-old boy. And I still dream of flying a Spitfire. So, for you, you must have thought that old bloke you must have been thinking, mate, you're the one who, has lived the dream.
Exactly. That's what really hit home to me. I was looking at this guy and talking to this guy, and he was like my hero. I'd never met him before, but I'm like, you flew Spitfires? Really? And then, he wanted to be me. And that was like, really? Well, I'm no one. I'm just a kid wanting to be a pilot. And then that's what convinced me is like, I have potential. And if you don't lose potential, it disappears. Potential is only there for a certain amount of time, then it washes away. And then I'm fortunate that, once again, the wheel turned. And then, like I said, my granddad learned to fly in Temora. I fly aircraft in Temora. In fact, I fly the Spitfires that are in Temora. So, I now am qualified on Spitfires. And, that is the full circle. I now fly a Spitfire, and every time I take off in a Spitfire, you look out at that elliptical wing, and it's just such a beautiful plane to fly. And you do a roll up, you take off, pull up, and do a roll, and you go, it's magic. And this is where my aviation career started, and here I am.
I'm starting to take a bit of a dislike to you, Matt. Now, have you got a 2-seater over there?
I have a 2-seat Spitfire. I've got a 2-seat Mustang that I own, so take you to find a Mustang.
All right, I'll be happy with that. We better not just talk about Spitfires all day, because I could definitely do that. The other thing I picked up in your book, so you left school and you got into the Air Force, the flight school, and it seems like that basic training, the officer training school, didn't really agree with you. You weren't that convinced about the authority figures and the sort of how high do I jump sort of stuff, which you have to learn, I guess, in the military, just to become part of in the groove and part of the machine. And it was, it struck me about, I was thinking about personality types, because within medicine, for example, I think this is very much a generalization, and I've got friends in all specialties, so this will offend some, but I don't mean to offend any. But you can definitely look at different specialties within medicine. For example, anaesthetists, I think, are fairly relaxed people, slightly introverted, but good in a crisis. They remain calm, and that's ideal for that situation. The cardiac surgeons, who I'm going to maybe draw an analysis between them and the fighter pilots, have an ego, and they're strong personalities, and they don't really like being told what to do. But that's why they're good at their job, because to cut someone's chest open and have someone's heart in your hand, you have to have a little bit of confidence in yourself. And I imagine if you're flying a $100 million aircraft and you have to be the best of the best to get into the seat of that aircraft, you have to believe in yourself a little bit. And sometimes that might come across as making people seem arrogant, or, not the sort of people that are that relaxed to be around. Do you think there was a bit of that made you uncomfortable with that basic training?
Yeah, well, I grew up as a little bit of a loner. I was on a small farm, and I used to ride motorbikes and ride horses and that sort of stuff. And I was more than comfortable going up into the hills for the whole day on my own. And I'd never been in the Air Force cadets. I didn't even know the difference between a sergeant and a wing commander. And all of a sudden, here I am joining the Air Force. And I was quite concerned about the officer training school, basic school, like officer school, military school. As it turned out, all of the guys at the time, but now guys and girls, who became fighter pilots, who are fighter pilots, had that little bit of loner in them, and that little bit of mischievous, probably got kicked out of class a few times at school sort of thing, good at school, but always in a little bit of trouble. So I went there thinking I was joining this, yes sir, no sir, 3 bags, full sir regiment where no one's allowed to have any personality. Turns out my best mates in the Air Force were just like me. It's like, hey, let's see if we can get away with this or that. A little bit of spunk. And as you say, you need to be very confident to be a pilot to start with, but especially to be a fighter pilot, because you're training to be able to go as a gladiator. Effectively, you're training to go into an arena and go toe to toe with someone if required, and only one person survives. And that requires confidence. Fighter pilots are often, and you mentioned it, fighter pilots and possibly cardiac surgeons are potentially labelled as arrogant, and I've been labelled as arrogant by people that that don't really know me. And I guess I've had to define in my head, why aren't I arrogant? And so I've defined for myself the difference between confidence and arrogance. And confidence is someone who arrogance is someone who believes they can do anything that they think they can do, and no one else can tell them otherwise. Someone who's confident has the same belief they can win something or do something to the same level, but they're more than open to listen to advice or someone else's opinion on how they could have done it better. And that's the difference between confidence and arrogance. So, and in the military, I don't think there's many arrogant pilots because they're weeded out in debriefs. It's like, dude, that you didn't do that right. An arrogant person will go, yes, I did. And that's not going to hack it in the military. You've got to be able to go, okay, how do I do it better? And then the next day, come back with a smiling face going, watch this. That's confidence. Whereas if people just see the watch this bit, they're like, how arrogant is that guy?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think we see the same in other special forces in the military and the army and so forth. Those guys don't quite fit the mold, and actually, we've got a job for you. There can be a spot for all comers. Well, maybe not all comers, but yeah, there are some personality types which you're looking for in different branches of the service and in life.
Yeah. Exactly.
You had your sight sets on being a fighter pilot. In fact, you wanted to be a combat flight instructor, I think, which is another level up again, the top best of the best of the best. So how did it go, that transition through the Air Force? Once you got into planes, was that a bit more comfortable?
You're always a bit shy about saying when you join the Air Force, I'm going to be a fighter pilot, because everyone's like, here's another one, another guy that wants to be a fighter pilot. So you sort of keep those thoughts to yourself initially when you join the Air Force. It's like, I just want to be the best pilot I can be. And as soon as I got through the officer training course, which I was actually concerned I was going to fail, and I've talked to some of my instructors since, and they actually said they didn't think I was going to pass either. But as soon as I got in the planes, that was where I felt at home. And what I found out subsequently, I was a little bit unusual on my pilot training, because most Air Force pilots hate their pilot training because it's your career. If you don't pass, you don't have a career. So they're just the pressure and the stress of having to pass the course brings people down. Whereas I just absolutely loved pilot's course. It's like, are you kidding me? You're paying me every morning to get up and go flying in a really cool plane. And I'm 18 years old. How cool is this? So every morning I was like, boom, let's go. Woohoo, I'm going to go flying again. And absolutely loved it. And I think that then helped me have some pretty great results. Ultimately, at the back, this is back in 1992. So there's been a lot of people through since then. But in 1992, I set the Air Force record for overall result as an aggregate score for graduation. I got the highest result ever in the history of the Air Force. And I didn't know that at the time that I was achieving that, not until after I graduated. I said, and oh, by the way, you just broke all the records. And I think a lot of the reason for that is that I absolutely enjoyed what I was doing. So every morning I didn't go to work scared of making a mistake. Every morning I went to work going, I wonder how good I can do it today and how much fun it's going to be. And took off with a smile on my face going, I can't wait to see how this goes. And that's confidence. That's part of being confident is actually looking forward to execution. Whereas underconfident is dreading execution because of what might happen.
And everything's easier if you love. Everything's easier if you love what you're doing.
Exactly. And I think that goes to so many. That's sports psychology 101. If you're looking forward to the competition, you're probably going to do a lot better than looking forward to the competition being over.
So you did come out the other end as a fighter pilot, obviously, and if I recall correctly, in fact, when you're at the recruiting office or the place where you sign up to join the Air Force was the day that Operation Desert Storm started, and that was announced in the office, and your parents must have turned a shade of pale when that was spoken.
Yeah, pretty much. We were we're on the top floor of the recruiting place in Sydney, like 50 stories up, whatever. And all the new recruits and their families are sitting in a room. And then, some guy in a uniform, I didn't know if he was a sergeant or a wing commander. He comes in, he goes, "Oh, just so you all know, about 30 minutes ago, the US just have gone into Kuwait and dropped bombs to try and force Iraq out. So there's a war on." And, it's like you got your pen in your hand with your contract going.
And did you go, shit, yeah, and sign? Or did you go, second thought?
And he's like, if anyone, these contracts, we can rip them up and throw in the bin if you don't want to join still. And I'm like, sounds like an adventure. Yeah. My parents are like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And then the next thing is like, and there's now a bomb threat. We've got to walk down the 50 flights of stairs out and do an evacuation, and then say goodbye to your parents in the park over the road before you get on the bus to fly down to Melbourne. So it was quite a day one for those recruits.
It might have all been a simulation just to test you out. No.
Yeah, that's right. You're like, is this really happening? You got to Point Cook, put the TV on. It's like, oh, geez, they're actually dropping bombs.
Yeah, right. So from that day until you finished your training, the first part of your training where you're actually flying a jet, how long was that?
So flying a Hornet was probably about 3 to 4 years. For me, for my generation, it was about a year longer than what it normally takes because there'd been an accident in the Mackie, which was the lead-in fighter, the transition between the PC-9 and the Hornet. And there'd been an accident where a wing had fallen off and all of the Mackies had been grounded for a period of time. So there'd been a cease of training for 12 months. But typically it takes, from when you graduate with your wings, which is 18 months after joining, it's typically another 2 years and you're in an F-18. So, so it's still a pretty quick process to be, in your 20 or 21 years old and you're flying around in a $50 million supersonic jet fighter. So it's kind of cool.
It's very cool. And when we got flown back from Thailand after the cave rescue, we came home in a RAAF C-19, is it? Or C-17, the big
C-17, yep.
And they let us sit up the front in the jump seats with the two pilots. And I'm looking at these boys who looked about 12 years old and thinking, how's this possible? Can we get an older one? But then you would have been younger than those guys when you were flying a Hornet. So it is extraordinary. The trust, the trust that's put in.
I looked like I was 12 years old. I was I wasn't allowed in pubs without showing my ID.
Well, I was looking at the photo on the front of this, actually. I mean, is that your Tinder photo that you're still using? Because you look about 20 there.
Well, there's a photo. If you look in the middle of that book, there's a photo of me sitting in an F-18. And I'm actually on my second tour in that photo, and I still look like I'm about 17 years old. Yeah. I'm actually been in the Air Force for probably about 8 years at that point.
So when did you get deployed after that?
It was a funny situation because I did a couple of tours on Hornets and then was selected for, my ultimate goal was to be a fighter combat instructor, which is our version of Top Gun school. I was able to get onto that course and was able to dux that course as well. But it was the first course I did in my Air Force career where it wasn't up to how hard I worked. It was my first, call it team course, where there's no way an individual can pass fighter combat instructor course on their own. They have to work as a team to be able to do it. So when I say I duxed it, that was more of just I happened to be the one out of 5 of us that were there. And then I stayed on as the Top Gun instructor, and then was sent over to America for the final part of my fantasy dream was to go and live in another country and fly another type of fighter. So I was sent to America to fly the F-15E Strike Eagle, an amazing aircraft, and to go there for 3 years to operate the F-15, but also instruct on it and also help at certain times on their Top Gun school, which is called Fighter Weapons School. I was told I was going to America. It was probably about June of 2001. It's like, hey, you've been selected to go to America at the end of the year for 3 years to fly F-15. It's like, yeah, that's pretty cool. Pretty cool job to be going to do. And then September 2001, there was the attacks in the World Trade Center, and I left Australia in December of 2001 to go to America to fly F-15s. So it was like, I don't actually know what I'm turning up to now. I don't know what my role's going to be. I don't know how this is going to progress. I don't know what the attitude's going to be in America. Ultimately, long story short, about 15 months later, my squadron, I was basically pulled aside and said, hey, Matt, you are getting grounded. because we need all available assets to train up crews that are going to go to Operation Iraqi Freedom in the Middle East. And because you're an Australian officer, we can't take it. And it was a devastating blow, not because I wanted to go to war and blow things up. It's because that's what my job was. A big part of my job is looking after my mates. So when there's combat and conflict, my job is to be standing shoulder to shoulder with my mates, so that I've got their back. And to not be standing next to your mates while they go and get shot at, it's devastating. And so it was a devastating thing to be told. Ultimately, they were able to reverse those decisions, and I was allowed to join my squadron in the Middle East for Operation Iraqi Freedom, flying F-15s. So I was flying an American aircraft in an American unit as an Australian officer.
I think that leads us to the story that I alluded to earlier when you had a bit of a moment in the aircraft. Do you want to talk us through that? Because for me, reading that in the book is the ultimate in time slowing down, muscle memory kicking in, decision making and training, just saving people's lives. So tell us that story.
Yeah, I've had a few incidents like that in the desert, but it's probably the opening chapter you're talking about there, I'm assuming. I found myself in a situation I didn't want to be in, which was lower than I wanted to be and slower than I wanted to be, because I was following someone else that was not leading me the way I would have led the formation. I had a backseater in the F-15 for this particular flight who wasn't assisting me that much. He was a bit of a hindrance. And it was nighttime. I had night vision goggles on, and I was actually preemptively jinking my aircraft because I wasn't comfortable. I was feeling like I was under threat in the environment I was in. So basically, you start weaving the aircraft so that you're not presenting an easy target. So lead's just drilling along straight and level. I'm about 3 miles behind him, which makes my situation even worse because you can imagine if you're on the ground with a missile and you go, oh, look, a jet. There'll be another one soon. There he is there. Uh-huh. So I was that guy. So I was already preemptively maneuvering because I wasn't comfortable. And then in one of the turns, I saw a flash of light, which is kind of the best way to describe it is like a welding arc, a very intense bright light. And I was like, oh, that's a missile launch. And the light shot forwards rapidly, like just moved very rapidly out in front of me. So, okay, it's going out that way. And initially my thought is, it's gone after the lead. So I then turned away from where it was going. So it's going that way, like, man, I'm going this way. And as I turned my aircraft, it then stopped going forwards and then turned with me. And I was like, oh, that's a coincidence. So instinctively, and what we're trained is, that didn't, first maneuver didn't work, or the weapon's gone with you. So you want to test it. You want to see, was that a coincidence, or is it really actually tracking me? So I reversed the aircraft back and pulled hard the other way, look back down this side, pick it up, the little welding arc, and it's now coming back with me. I'm like, that's a bad thing. I think I'm the special guy here that it's selected. So I got one more maneuver in back to the right, putting out what we call chaff, which is to destroy the radar track of the whatever it is that's looking at us. Some flares as well, because I wasn't getting any targeting indications, which was also very unusual. And then on the third pull back, I looked down and I can't see the missile anymore. So it burnt out. So it's a very short range, high speed missile that I'm working with, which means the engagement time is probably about 6 to 8 seconds from launch is when you're expecting it's going to impact you. So I'm now probably about 5 seconds into it. So it's all happening pretty quick. At that point, it's like, well, I can't see it, but I've got to defend against it because I know it is tracking me. So I do what's called last-ditch defense, which is basically, in layman's terms, may not be that layman, it's called an orthogonal break. Just high-G maneuver to have the missile not be able to do its end-game maneuver and track you, like get it to overshoot and miss you by enough distance that if its proximity fuses go off, it still doesn't either kill you or damage the aircraft to a point where you can't continue to fly it, because you don't want to eject, over bad land. So I do my first orthogonal break, like high G roll, just basically like, squinting like, is it going to hit? And then I came out of that and it's like, I still don't know where it is. I don't know if I've got the timing right. I don't know if it's still coming or it's gone. So got nothing else to do. So I do another one and then go, I can do these all day, or I can just go, man, it's been a good 13, 14 seconds now. whatever's happened has happened, and then keep going. Yeah, so it's that's the life of a fighter pilot in real quick time. That life's okay, and then you'll get 10 seconds of I might die right now, and then it's over. Okay, let's continue to tiptoe away, regroup, and keep going and go and bomb the target.
And can that missile keep steering and keep harassing you even if after it's run out of puff? As long as it's got momentum.
Once it's overshot, it can't. Yeah,
okay.
Once you overshoot a missile, they can't turn it. So you see that in the movies all the time. You're like, and then it comes around. Once they overshoot, that's it. They're going too fast in one direction, and the missile can't turn around and come back at you. So as soon as it's gone, it's like, well, that's gone. I hope there's nothing else coming. So it's like check 6, and keep running away at this stage. There is often good reason to run when you can, and that was the case too. Right, we've survived that. Let's run.
Was that the worst experience you had flying over there, or what could be worse than that?
It was the worst. It was the closest encounter I had to me dying. I probably wouldn't say it's the worst experience. I had worse emotional experiences. We lost a crew. We lost a jet with some of my mates on board, which was a worse experience. I was shot at quite a bit. I did hear people screaming on the radios, "I was dying," those sorts of things. They were worse experiences than me nearly dying. That's the unselfish nature of a protector. When you're a military person and your job is to protect people, you are more concerned about other people's risk and other people's hurt than you are about your own self being at risk or being hurt. That's what allows defenders to step in the line of fire to protect people.
Yeah, that was a bit clumsy the way I put that, but I'd certainly take your point. I've spoken to a lot of people on this show who have lost friends in their chosen pursuit, including other military people, but more often motorsport people or base jumpers, cave divers, including myself. And I often wonder how people get back in the saddle after these sort of things happen. But universally, it seems to me that people with such passion for what they're doing, on the one side, the hobbyists like myself, it's because we love what we do. For you, it's more than a love; it's a job and a calling, a vocation, I guess. And with an honourable intention of defending people within that country. So maybe that makes it easier, or I don't know, or harder to face up to work the next day when you know that someone's lost their life.
Yeah, I'm pretty tragic at it, actually. I'm a bit of a steely-eyed fighter pilot who tears up at the drop of a hat. So unfortunately, I have lost a lot of friends over the years in aviation. Unfortunately, a lot of my race pilot mates have died, not in racing, but what I've discovered is that if you're involved professionally in something that has a lot of risk in it, your highest risk activities are those outside of the profession, because you subconsciously carry the risk levels and the acceptance of risk across into things that aren't as well planned or controlled or with as much safety equipment and as much margin, because you're used to being on the edge. So I've had probably, it's probably up to around 6 already of my race pilot mates. It has probably only been 30 of us in total. 6 of us have died outside of racing, doing stuff that just they shouldn't have been doing. I have become quite used to, unfortunately, mourning good friends, but someone that I know quite well, who's a bit of a mentor for me when I was struggling a bit, he said, you've got to learn from their mistake, otherwise it seems a waste. So learn from their mistake. And then he said, think of it like an old hotel mailboard at the back. He said, then you've got to roll up the incident and you just got to file it at the back of the counter and just leave it there. Because if you keep looking at it every single day, you'll go crazy and you'll stop enjoying what it was that you were doing together. So that's what I've learned to do is you grieve for a couple of days. Sometimes you don't have the option of a couple of days if it's combat, but you have to grieve and you have to look at a few lessons, but you have to file it away, because otherwise if you keep looking at it every single day, you're gonna start second guessing yourself.
Yeah, well, interestingly, some of the divers I've known who have died, elite, level exploration divers have died on very routine, mundane dives. And I think what you say there really rings true. Maybe they really let their guard down. I know a couple of the biggest frights I've had have been on dives that should have been very routine, and I think complacency has crept in, and always diver error in all these cases, invariably. So, yeah, you need to not let your guard down when things appear to be simple and straightforward.
Exactly. And I've had my closest calls, while flying a plane myself, not in a race environment, because this is easy, I'm not racing, but the ground is still just as deadly. And same with your situation. The water, you drown in the water just as well. If it's 2 feet deep as to 100 feet deep, it's just as deadly. You just only think of it as deadly when you're in the risky environment.
So I want to talk a bit about this Red Bull air racing caper, because that is extraordinary, and I doubt whether I'll be chatting to another Red Bull air racer anytime soon. So we better get the dirt on all this stuff. And no doubt there's a very long story between leaving the Air Force, learning to be an aerobatic pilot in all its levels, and then ending up in this extraordinary event. First thing is, how do you get an invite to participate in that race?
A little bit of who you know, but also they were always on the lookout for who they could bring in. I was already flying. I was back in Australia flying fighters. I was doing aerobatics on weekends in competitions just to challenge myself. Like that whole continue to push and challenge. I went to the air race over in Perth, and I got chatting to the pilots, and it's like, hey, going, I'm Matt. I fly fighters and I fly aerobatics, and this is really cool. What you guys do? And they're like, well, we're looking for an Aussie. You should have a go at it. And it's like, no way. But ultimately, with more conversation, we decided that I could probably have a dabble at it. But it did take 2 years of dedicated training to even get an invite to participate in a training camp, in a race training camp in Spain, and then successful at that, and that then led to racing. Now it's probably a bit more. It's a bit more controlled. Where they'll have thousands and thousands of applicants essentially, and they cull them on who they are, what their background is, what their personality is, what level of competition experience they have, all that sort of stuff, and then they'll start culling from there.
Is it now like a show that they put on, and you're one of the performers? I mean, Formula One almost seems like that.
We were always asking that as competitors, because it's a competition and there's a world champion, and that's the reason I was doing it. Now, I don't see myself as a showman. I'm not I don't want to be someone that go, that was a great show. Because it's not, because I'm putting everything out there to win.
Yeah.
I like competing, I like winning, and I like trying my hardest. At times, the competitors, we would ask them, and go, is this a show or a competition? Because some of the things they were trying to get us to do, it's like, that's for entertainment. Like, I'm here to try and win a bloody race. And if it's a show, let me know, because I'm going to stop trying so hard. I'm not going to keep spending my money to make my plane faster and doing development and pushing myself so hard. If I can actually just turn up with a plane and drink beer every night, just let me know and I'll do it. It was a competition, but as you say, like Formula One, they parade the drivers around and get them to do stupid stuff for entertainment purposes. And I'm sure it drives the Formula One drivers mad as well. It's like, I'm here to be serious and race cars, not to show me hitting a golf ball into a bucket.
Well, you can see the look in their eyes with every media interview and so forth. They just think, I have to do this, suck it up, because this is part of my
Kimmy's
contract.
I love watching Kimmy interviews. Kimmy just says, really, I'm not doing this. He just stands up and walks out.
There's a few of them like that. So do they pay for Red Bull to be painted on your aircraft and make it look schmick, or do you have to do all that?
So basically, the way it ran and the way it is actually restarting, not through Red Bull, for another company, is that we're paid a chunk of money as a contract to provide racing services to the air race. It's my team, it's my plane, it's my equipment. But then I go out there and look for sponsors and paint sponsorship on my aircraft. I was sponsored by a Red Bull company, but that didn't really have anything to do with the fact that it was the Red Bull air race. It's just that since I was doing pretty well at it, they then wanted to sponsor me to try and win the championship. So that it was one of their guys won the championship.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so every aircraft was individually painted. Some didn't have sponsors, some did, and that's very similar to most other motorsports, where get commissions from the event, but you're making money out of sponsorship.
Does it feel like a motorsport to you? Because that's what it looks like to me.
Well, for me, it was nothing but a motorsport. It wasn't a show; it was a motorsport, and I raced to win at every race, and I had race pressure on me to win, and I spent money to win. It was a race.
Now, I better get you just to explain the nuts and bolts of an air race like this to me and the people who are listening, because you watch it and you go up and you go back and through the gates and then up and back, and you're like, is it a time trial or how does it all work?
Yeah, so it's against the clock, and that was for safety reasons. Once you start putting two aircraft in the same piece of sky, the risk of mid-air goes through the roof. So it's a timed event, like slalom, downhill skiing, and that sort of stuff. There are penalties for doing stuff that's wrong. So the idea is to get through with no penalties, and it's basically start speed of 200 knots, so 370 kilometres an hour. We're flying at about 30 feet off the ground or water. You go in and around pylons, which are air-inflated pylons. In fact, that's a pylon, and that's me flying past it. And each run in the track lasts about 60 seconds. Every track's different at every location. And then, it's a head-to-head knockout. So you race, you're knocked out, you go to the next round. And, you spend a day doing that, and then ultimately there's a winner. That winner collects a trophy for the race itself, and also world championship points are handed out at the end of the year. There's a world champion presented to the sport. So very much like, once again, Formula One, apart from the fact they're individual time trials in a head-to-head situation, but we do travel all around the world doing it.
Now, you are the reigning world champion at the moment from 2019.
I am. I'm reigning world champion forever because Red Bull then stopped racing, and they've sold the race to another company. So the next company is not calling it Red Bull Air Race. So I'm actually going to run with that and say that I'm the Red Bull Air Race Perpetual World Champion.
Excellent. And will you be hoping to visit the next race or race again? Is that the plan?
Yep. So I actually have a race contract for the next series, which started earlier this year and didn't happen. So I'm sitting on a contract. The race plane's in the hangar just next door. We're doing some development on it, and we're just basically marking time until we can take all of our equipment overseas and start racing.
I was going to ask, you mentioned flying over water or land. I was going to ask if there's an advantage in flying over water, but I was watching a video from 2010 which suggested to me that water was a much better place for you to be flying. Do you want to talk me through that one?
No idea what you're talking about. Yeah. So I was I highlighted myself pretty in a very spectacular manner by hitting the water in Windsor, Detroit, on the Detroit River, and in a race I G-stalled my aircraft at low level, high speed in the racetrack, which stalled the plane, which is the wing stopping flying. It's not the engine. So the wing stopped flying because I exceeded the angle that the wind can hit the wing and still stay attached and provide lift. So stalled the aircraft, it rolled it onto its back, and I'm at 30 feet. I was able to get the plane back upright just as I hit the water. And so I actually hit the water a few times, like with both wings and the wheels and everything, gathered it up, and was able to peel away from where the crowd was and fly back to the airfield and land successfully, albeit with a bit of damage to the aircraft. So as you say, if that was on land, it probably would have been a different situation. I probably wouldn't have skimmed and bounced so easily. I probably would have rolled into a ball and caught fire, to tell you the truth.
Did you cop a bit of stick from the other pilots after that? That would have been, score a new nickname or anything?
No, actually, I landed. I was humiliated, really. That's my profession, and that's about as bad as it gets. I just crashed a plane in my profession. So I was, by the time I landed, I was already pretty angry with myself, very embarrassed with that situation. I guess it shows what happens when you're in an environment where you are taking known risks, and it's with a high risk environment with other people who understand and appreciate the same risks. The pilot group rallied around me. Not a bad thing at all was said to me or about me by the pilots, to the point where the pilot group went for the management and said, "You're trying to kill us. We've been saying this forever, that you're trying to kill us. You're designing tracks that are almost unflyable, and you're making us go out there and fly them. And lucky Matt was able to survive that one because the next one's going to be a fatal crash. You've got to change something. It was heartening to see that sort of camaraderie come through, which I think most people who operate in a high-risk environment can actually understand from their own peers. That when you're in a low-risk hobby, everyone attacks each other, like footy teams, and it's like he sucks, she sucks, whatever. But when you're at an elite level in a perceived high-risk environment, it doesn't matter if they're competitors; they all band together when something goes wrong.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking that if you were surrounded by competitors who are all Australians, you would have got a nickname out of that for sure, like Bouncy or something. I don't know.
Exactly, Splash.
I was watching that video, and one of the things that struck me, obviously, was the reaction of your wife, which was caught on the video or was, replayed on the video, and which makes me ask the obvious question about how she feels about what you do, and has that been a point of difficulty in your relationship at times? Because I can certainly tell you that for myself, that has been a bone of contention with my activities and my family, and my feeling of guilt of putting myself at risk at times through my sport and my passion. How have you handled that?
That incident was a bit of a wake-up call. I didn't feel I was at risk in the sport until that point, and maybe that's a little bit of arrogance, but it was confidence, and I thought I was doing things right, and I just happened to make a mistake on the day. There was a whole heap of things that led to that mistake, could have stopped it, but that was the first time I actually went, this could actually kill me. If I do that again, it could kill me. My wife, she's actually ex-military as well. She's a flight surgeon, so she understands risks. She saw me go to war. She was pretty understanding the whole time about the risks that were there, but she also completely trusted my ability to do risk assessment, risk analysis, and risk mitigation, which is what you have to do in these levels of sport, and these levels of activities. You have to. You can't just walk in there with your fingers crossed going, hope this works. You've got to every morning get up and go, is everything in place? Is the training in place? Has the risk matrix been ticked? Where's the gap that can actually hurt me? And on that particular day, we missed it. But so she had ultimate confidence in my judgment. It shook it a little bit from that event, but what regained it rapidly was I didn't go out and fly the next day going, wow, got away with that. We sat down for 2 weeks and we analysed what were the causal factors in there. Every single detail, what did I eat for the last 72 hours? Everything. What were they, and what can we put in place to make sure that never, ever, ever happens again? So we did that, and then you come out the back of that, and you can actually put your hand on your heart and say, "I'm probably the safest pilot in the track now. I'm the safest guy." And in fact, one of the pilots said that at the very next race. One of the management said, "They're still deciding if we're going to let Matt fly this next race." And one of the pilots, Paul Bonham, put his hand up and said, "I'd just like to point out that Matt is probably the safest pilot in this room right now." So, and that's exactly true. When you have an incident, if you do it right, you learn from it, you uncover every single rock, and you regain your own confidence, but you regain the confidence of those around you that you've learned from it, and that is not going to happen again.
Well, and you can also share those learnings with the others as well, so they become safer because of it.
For sure, yeah, and that's how perceived high-risk environments don't end up high risk. It's only from the outside they still look high risk because you're not getting let in on the information that's been learnt, often through blood loss.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to finish, Matt. I think our time is up. That's been a fascinating insight into someone whose life has been pretty exciting from almost the day dot, and sounds like it's not over yet. So I'm very excited to hear that you'll be racing next year, and I'll definitely be watching out for that. Are we allowed to know who will be promoting the race, or who we need to look out for? Or is that news yet to be released?
The title sponsor is yet to be announced, but we'll be promoting it pretty aggressively on media, social media, all platforms. When we're going, we're going to make sure Australia knows it's happening again.
We'll know about it. Well, I can't wait to see how well you do and how quick the plane is. It's brilliant. Thank you very much for joining me, Matt. It's been great to have a chat.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's the show for today. Thanks for joining me. If you want any more information, you can check out the podcast website at realriskpodcast.com.